Hello, it's me, Kyle. Welcome to Give Pause Hobby, the channel where I stop to appreciate the things I love to fill my free time with. We're back with another episode of Solo Section, where I teach the solo rules for games that I love to play. And today, we're focusing on Empyreal, or I guess I need to put this one up, Empyreal As Above, So Below. This is the expansion, the big box expansion that adds the solo automata for you to play with. Now, how does this work exactly? I mean, obviously I'll be going through the rules with you, but in overview, each of the companies in Empyreal, sorry about the green one, it's probably showing you the background, is going to have its own little deck of kind of cards specific to that company. As you might imagine, they might focus a little bit more on a certain type of landscape than the other ones, because if you haven't picked up on that, there is a strong bent towards that in the actual companies themselves. For instance, the blue company, King's Line, has 3 of the 5 cards that reference the water tiles. But they also have a mechanical kind of bent towards a certain type of gameplay style that they prefer. There's not really like a huge thematic tie to this, but you can headcanon, what you imagine it would be like based off of the folio of the company, the look of the engineers and everything, but also the mechanics of what they're actually doing. Now, it's not just the 5 cards for each faction. There are these other more generic, well, not more, just generic cards. So they have just a gray background. They don't have the colored outline. So they're not affiliated with any company, because these are going to be shuffled and inserted into those other cards. So this is going to make it possible for this game to have one of my favorite aspects of solo games, for those that have this, which is an opponent that grows over time. Now, not necessarily learns. This isn't really like responding to the board state in any way. It's just having these like fits and spurts of like evolutionary growth, that suddenly it can just do this extra thing that it couldn't do before. If it ever draws that card, something new happens. And I think that's super interesting, because the opponent you start the game playing off against will not be the opponent you are ending the game against. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is all the overview. So I guess the last thing I'll say is this is just a fantastic, it really kind of like the ideal, in my opinion, the ideal of a simple, low friction solo mode that is worthy of playing and replaying and over and over and over again, not just because there's some variety in the different companies. I've played against all of them so far, and there's definitely that. There's also definitely variety in which of these generic cards that say you could play the same company 3 games in a row, and it might wind up feeling like a totally different company every time. However, really my favorite part about solo modes like this is it allows me to try my side multiple times, just kind of like in a training environment. Ha 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 ha. Choo choo. First of the unintentional train puns, I guess. So it allows me to say, I haven't played as Star Chaser yet, so I'm going to play against Star Chaser and one or more of these automa opponents, and it just lets me play the game without changing really anything that I'm doing. I mean, a very small amount, we'll get to that in the rules, but this is not a solo mode that's a different feel from the multiplayer mode. The solo mode is a multiplayer game. It's just that the other opponents are being controlled by cards. Now, let's actually jump into the rules on the second page to talk about that just a little bit, because this is really versatile in terms of what it provides you as a player for options for your games. So on the second page, it's page 7 in the As Above, So Below. It says multiplayer and co-op. You can use the automa. I'm just going to say automa because automata is just like too much. You can use the automa to add a player to any multiplayer free-for-all game or fill a space in a team game as a teammate or an opponent. Remember, there's rules for a team game, which I'm showing you right now, from the original base box. So you can absolutely add the automa companies to that. They could be on your side, they could be against. It says you can also team up with a friend to face off against a team of automa. So you could do a 2-on-2, you and your buddy versus 2 robots, which is fun. Follow these same rules using the appropriate map size, but give a token to the last human player in turn order. You may use a train of a color not in play for this purpose. If an ambiguous situation comes up, the player with the token makes the decision. Then they pass this token counterclockwise. The player that receives the token will resolve the next ambiguous situation. So this is really, primarily if you're playing multiplayer free-for-all, because there will be times when something could happen one of 2 ways or multiple ways, and one of those options is going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt your opponent. And depending on who has that train token, whoever's last in order or whoever got it from the other person, they get to spin it the way that's best for them. So that's super important. In a co-op game, you can just table talk and figure out how you want it to fall, because the rules say if there's ever an absolute tiebreaker that isn't figured out by the rules, you just determine what the company will do. And then it last says, in team games, do not ignore specialists and spell cards that copy other players. We'll get to why that's in there in a second. And do not award bonus 5 victory points for each good at the end. Now, to be honest, I've played this game quite a bit, but I've never actually played it as a team game. So I didn't actually know what that was referring to. But in the team variant page 13 in the base rule book, one of the bonus points, the sources of bonus points, is for each color of good, give 5 victory points to each team that has the most of that color. So when you're playing with the bots, you will not do that thing. You'll count all the other victory points, but that one's not in there, because I talk about this a lot in the root bot videos for playing root solo or adding to a multiplayer, that there are things that the bots are aware of in the board state, and there are things that they are not. And it's not fair if there's something that the players can plan on and actually strategize around that the bots just don't even know exists. And one of those things in this case, the bot has no idea that you're able to game the system by getting the most of different types of goods. They're just going to follow the rules that we're going to go over in a second to maximize their potential point scoring. But in terms of that alternate bonus thing, they have no idea that exists. So you can't do that, because that would be cheating. All right, so let's get back to the top of the rules of the solo section here. Now, first of all, I know that just covered the team variant and the co-op and all that sort of stuff. You can do this game solo. You just talked about how you can do it, add a bot to a multiplayer, free-for-all or a team game. You can also do this solo, solo one-on-one. You can also do this solo against however many bots you want. And they don't have to be you versus the bots. You could add 2 bots. I've done that quite a few times. And then it's just a 3-player free-for-all. And the 2 bots are just operating, their own game. And then they consider each other opponents as well as you. So with that, let's get into the beginning, the setup. So follow the setup on page 5 of Empyreal Spells and Steam rulebook. Use the same setup as a standard 2-player game. Now, obviously, if you're playing against 2 bots, don't do that. Do the setup for a 3-player game. And remember, I'm showing it here, that's covering both not only the map tiles that you're going to cobble together to make your game space, but also the goal tiles, or the reward tiles that you're going to put in the different cities. So just take that into account and make the table as the rules say you should. Do not use awards when playing with the automa. So you can't do that. Again, the bots wouldn't know that those exist. So there might be lots of victory points riding on the line of something that they wouldn't know to pursue, and maybe even something that would go contrary to their programming. So which is true of any game that has like end game victory points. Sometimes those are, off the beaten path, so to speak, that, the through line, like, well, this is what's going to get me the most victory points. Great. That's what the bot is kind of operating off of, not these kind of alternate things at the end of the game. So sorry, if you're a fan of the award tiles, you can't use them. Choose a company to play against and take its 5 company cards as the Automa's starting deck. The 16 generic cards are upgrade deck. Just a pro tip from me to you. I take that company and I close the folio, because you won't be using the spread, spoiler, you won't be using the inside of the company folio, but it's a great spot for you to just have hold space on the table for that company, and to collect the goods they collect, to have the cards there. So just close it up so you can see the company's logo. Now I have the fancier ones, so they lay nice and flat with like the not embossed, but like whatever it's called, with the company logo on it. Obviously not necessary. Whether you have the regular or the deluxe version, use that to kind of hold space for the bots. So that's their zone, so you don't mix it up with anything else. All right, so the player will take the first turn in the game, which means the Automa will place their headquarters first. The Automa will place 2 of their terrain cards on the map. The first on a hex matching the home terrain shown on their folio. So again, you'll want to have that if you don't offhand know which is the terrain that they like best, as close to the center of the map as possible, and as close to a city as possible. So center of the map first, close to a city second. The second is placed on an adjacent hex of any type except city or wasteland. And we'll come back to how you decide that in a second. The player places their headquarters, and then the game begins. The setup is really simple. There's not a tremendous amount of extra work that you have to do to implement the bot. It's just get out the appropriate company cards and then the generic cards. Grab a folio so you can look at their chosen terrain and then hold that space. And then drop a couple of trains for their starting headquarters. Again, they'll go first because you will actually start play first. All right, so how does this actually work once the game starts? So you've taken your first turn, it's back to the bot. On the Automa's turn, draw a card from the deck and resolve its effects to the best of its ability. When there's 1 card left in the Automa deck, it gains a card from the upgrade deck. Shuffle this card and all discarded cards into the Automa deck, then resume play, drawing and resolving a card if it was the Automa's turn. If there's ever ambiguity for the Automa, you decide what action it takes. All right, so in this little paragraph, which is part of just a 2-page spread for a solo mode, which is just, again, fantastic. There's not a lot of mental horsepower required to pilot this solo game, and that's great because that means you can just focus on the game itself rather than how to actually run it. So in this paragraph, this is important because every time the bot gets to 1 card left, it's going to draw a card from the generic deck, and then it's going to take back all of its cards from the discard pile, boop, until it has a new deck. You're going to shuffle that up. So there will be 1 card each round that the bot will not actually perform. So how I usually do this in my games is I take 1 card, and if I have, the decks or the backs of the cards are horizontal like this, so I will put 1 card on the bottom of the deck. Like once I shuffle it, I'll put 1 this way and all the rest this way. And as soon as I, on 1 turn, play the card that's here, so there's just this card left, I actually immediately at that point do what it's saying here. Don't wait until it's its turn and say, oh, there's only 1 card left, now I'm going to do it. No. At the end of the turn that you revealed that last card, do it then. Because then the next time it's the bot's turn, boom, you can get right into the fun. And that's way better to me. Different strokes for different folks, but that's how I usually do it. So there'll always be some functionality, some move that the bot will not use every time it goes through its deck. And it'll, depending on what faction you're playing, it'll go through its deck of, different amount of time, and just depending on which cards come out in which order. So you'll never know how many things it'll miss in a game, but it just helps you so you can't like count the cards in your head and know like, oh, I know that it's going to do this, this, this. You can kind of get an idea, but that's sort of just like reading an opponent. You can only get an idea. You can't know for sure. The last part of the like gameplay area is the player specialists. If you draw a specialist that deals with awards or copies abilities from another player, discard and replace it. Do not copy an automa card. So this is the it referenced it in the co-op and team variant. So you can actually use those if you're playing with another, meat bag at the table. But if you're just playing with robots, anytime you have someone that deals with those things, endgame awards or copying something, just ditch them and grab another one, because you will not be able to copy the bot cards. So let's go down to the actions. So that's like the overview of how this works. Now let's look at the like nitty gritty of how these like actions work themselves. Building track. And this will actually go back to that setup. Remember I said we'll talk about that in terms of breaking the tie for that second train car, because you'll use this priority. When resolving build track effects, the automa goes through the following list of priorities. First and foremost, build towards the city, nearest city not yet connected to their network if possible. So above anything else, if a bot has a city that it has not connected to yet, it will build in that direction. Doesn't matter how far away it is. If it's the closest city and it doesn't have a train already connected to it, that happens first. Second, if it can't build towards a city not in its network, so there's just like wasteland, or they drew at the beginning of the game, they can go on any other tile. So they definitely will go towards a city, which means they might actually connect. But later on in the game, maybe they can only drop a car on a water tile, and there are no water tiles that are heading the direction of cities. So then they'll go to priority 2. It will build on a legal hex that contains a good. Okay, that sounds logical. If it can't build on any hexes that contain a good, it will build towards the nearest good. So it actually prioritizes city above goods, which stands to reason, and then underneath goods, towards goods, so heading that direction. In either case, this is in the second bullet here, in either case, when given multiple options, it will prioritize options further away from players' networks. So it will not come in and like glom up your network unless it needs to. If you are in the way for getting those goods and it has no other options, then I guess it'll just get entangled. But if there are 2 water tiles, yours or one has your train and one does not, it'll go for this one. And you got to remember that, because for everybody's sake, it makes the game just a lot better. Important note here, this is not in the first bullet. So building towards the nearest city not yet connected, it doesn't matter if there are, there's one city that's 2 tiles away and one that's 3 tiles away, but you have trains in the way of that 2 tile away city. It'll just say, I don't know, that's closest, so I'm doing it. Now, I would say this isn't in the rules, but if you had 2 cities that are 2 tiles away, and to get to this one, you need to go and share a space with the player's train, and this one you don't, go for this one, because, that would make sense. It just would not disallow you from going for the nearest city, because that only technically affects the second bullet point. And then third, if you can't possibly build track with its drawn card, then it doesn't build. It will still resolve any other effects on the card, and oftentimes there will be something else. And it says this may happen several times in your play. It's normal. It's actually, part of the difficulty scaling that we'll get to later on, is that certain factions will have more of opportunity for these like dead draws than others, and you just got to take it for what it is. That's the game giving you an easy one, so enjoy it, because it won't always happen. Transfers. The automa will never transfer unless its card specifically allows it to. When it can transfer, it still follows the above build track priority. So if we jump ahead to the second page of the solo mode rules, on the last example they have, it says, gives you the example of a transfer card, where you see it can go to this one. It shows it's for Star Chaser, and it can go to any terrain, and then allows you one transfer over any of them: wasteland, city, or opponent. It says build track on each of the terrain types shown. Perform one wasteland, city, or competitor transfer for one of those builds. Now, if there is no reason to do that, then you just won't transfer. Again, you're going to follow the rules of the priorities, what the bot wants to do, and if none of them would, maybe transfers are available, but they wouldn't actually allow you to go to the nearest city or get to a tile with goods on it, then you don't have to worry about the transfer. But that is the only time it will transfer, is when it has that at the bottom of the card. Pro tip. Delivery. The automa will always deliver the largest number of goods possible when a delivery card is drawn. There's one delivery card in each of the company's 5-card starting deck. So this will only happen every so often, but you never know exactly when it's going to happen because you don't know the order of the cards that are going to be drawn. It takes and scores the goods and demand tiles just like a player. If there are different colors tied for largest possible delivery, use the priority listed on its delivery card from left to right. Again, let's look at the example on the second page. So at the bottom of the cards that have the delivery icon, the little box with the arrow coming out of it, there will be that line of the good types at the bottom. So from left to right, that's the priority that it wants to deliver. So if there's ever a tie, you just go to that, boom, bam. And what I talked about before, it will always deliver the maximum amount. It will never hold back. As a player, sometimes there's a benefit if you know that no one's close to your network and you can get maybe a 4-good delivery and then keep 1 or maybe even 2 goods to start working towards another tile. That's a better move than just delivering all 6 at the same time. Now, you run the risk of someone messing with that, but if you engineer turns around it, then you can make a bunch of points. The bot will never do that. It'll always just deliver the maximum amount it has, and it will take tiles for doing so. All right, moving goods. Just a couple, really, these are just specific tiebreakers. The second half of this page 6 rules is just showing you how to break ties in these different scenarios. And again, the second page of the solo rules is just examples. So I know I'm going into some Give Pause hobby depth on this, but when you're playing the game, this is super, super snappy, I promise you. When moving goods, the automa will first try to move goods that are in a player's network, but not in its own. So moving goods, let's be clear here, this is when you're allowed to pull a good into your network. So it's first and foremost going to do the natural thing, which is to yank something out of your network and into its own. So something that's on your car into a tile with its car. Into a hex where it is the sole occupant. So it wants to ideally bring it into where it has no competitors anymore. That makes sense. If it cannot, it will move a good from a hex it shares with a player into a hex where it is the sole occupant. So again, taking it from a place where it's in competition, bringing it to a zone where it's not. For both of these, it will prioritize goods that the player has the most opportunity to deliver. So this, I guess, could be seen a couple different ways. First of all, does the player have a connection to that city, to that goods connected city? So if it doesn't, then it's going to go for ones that it does. And if they are both, let's say, it has a couple options where it can pull a good from a player's tile, bring it into its own, and there are 2 different goods. And the player, you, have connection to both those cities. I would say then the bot would go for the one you have the most goods in your network. Doesn't really say that, but that would be the mean move. And so typically, whatever the mean move is what I'm going to choose for a robot if the tiebreaker ever comes to me. If it can't make either of these moves, it will make a good, or it will move a good that is of a color matching a city to which it's connected and closest to the player's network. So again, it wants to steal like from the player, because that's essentially like a 2-point swing, because you're taking something from the player and giving it to the bot. If it can't manage that, it's going to at least do a 1-point swing, which is bring a good into its network. So something that it's connected to, a city is connected to, and closest to player's network. So it's like a 1.5-point swing, because you are denying the player the ability to expand into that good by taking it. And last but not least, place Wasteland. The Automa must place Wasteland in a network-adjacent hex. It will never place a Wasteland on a hex with one of its own trains or in a direction that will impede its progress towards the nearest unconnected city. So it will never void its own train, and no matter how juicy a target could be with multiple other trains, with other goods, blah, 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 if it could impede its progress towards the nearest city, it won't do it. With those two things in mind, the Automa will first try to place a Wasteland on a hex in the player's network that contains a good. If it cannot, it will place it in a hex that contains a good closest to the player's network. Remember, if there's ambiguity, you decide between the possible choices. So, as always, with everything else, well, that's not true, because building track, it wants to get away from the player's network. But in terms of stealing goods, in terms of delivering goods, but also building a Wasteland, it wants to mess with the player's network, or at least move towards the player's network to make the player's life a little bit harder. Hello, it's Editing Kyle here. So I kind of forgot one really important thing, and that's because in the first edition of the rulebook, which is what I used the PDFs of because it looks way better than me taking a picture of my own rulebook, they missed something. So this is in regards to the end game, and it's going to make a huge difference on how the bot plays. So here is, I'm showing you the BGG official forum post about this. So it's ERRATA, things that didn't make it into the rulebook on the first edition. And from the expansion, it says that the solo automas, the final delivery rules were left out of the rulebook. They should read as follows. At game end, the Automata or automa will deliver all remaining eligible goods in its network before the player's final delivery, but it can only claim a maximum of 1 demand tile of each color during this final delivery. When using multiple automas, do all their final deliveries in the reverse order before doing the player's final delivery as normal. So this is kind of huge because it's going to be sucking out all of these resources before you can use them for your final delivery. So it behooves you to move away from the automa before that final delivery rips everything away from you before you can cash in on it. And critically, it is not that they can only get 1 resource tile in their final delivery. They can only get 1 resource tile in each color. So because they're able to just deliver everything of all types, they're able to uniquely score multiple cards or gold tiles in their final delivery. When us meatbags, we can only do 1 because we can only deliver to 1 city. So kind of huge thing that I missed because I was reading off of the first edition. I totally forgot. My own second edition has it right there in the rule book. So it is printed, but it is not printed in the old one. So please be aware of that. It makes a huge difference in terms of difficulty. That final delivery is brutal if you've never played with it before. All right, back to earlier Kyle, who's not in the middle of his 2-week tour. And that's pretty much the rules section. Now, that's with a pretty big caveat because you need to know how to actually read all of these cards, which, for a game like Empyreal, which has as many symbols as it does, once you really internalize that nomenclature, that how to read it, these cards are not going to present you anything that you don't understand. There'll be some edge cases, and those are covered on page 7 as to how they play out with the solo mode. So let's look at that real quick. So it says, Automa cards use the same iconography you'll find in the rest of Empyreal. Here are a few special cases to look out for. So we talked about delivery and how that works in terms of the priority of what they want to deliver, blah, blah, blah. Exhaust Captain, the second one it shows. Build track on a terrain type shown, then exhaust a player's captain, turning it face down. In a free-for-all game, exhaust each player's captain. In a co-op game, exhaust only the captain of the player directly to the automa's left. So the exhaust captain, that action doesn't change. It's the same thing. You turn it face down, you deny the player the ability to do it until they turn it face up again. However, the change is it a multiplayer game or is it a co-op game? If it's multiplayer, it's going to affect everybody. If it's co-op, it only affects one person because that would be brutal. In multiplayer, it's brutal for everybody equally. But if in co-op, the one bot could affect 2 people at once, a little bit broken. So next up, exhaust mana. Resolve the effect shown, then exhaust one of the player's mana, moving it off the folio. In a free-for-all game, exhaust mana, blah, 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 blah. Same as what we just talked about for the exhaust captain. Happens to everybody in free-for-all, happens to only one player in co-op for the same reason. Next up, gain upgrade. Build track on any terrain, except Wasteland, in this case, and gain a card from the upgrade deck. Shuffle that card into the Automa deck. Do not shuffle the discarded cards in yet. If there are no cards left in the upgrade deck, ignore the gain upgrade icon. So a couple things to mention here. First of all, yes, this is the little train car icon, same thing that we, the players, are going to use, except this is how it'll affect the bots. And it will not mean put everything back in because it is not it is not the end of the deck or one card left in the deck rule like we talked about earlier. So this is just adding something in, which could be kind of crazy because you're just adding it in midstream. You don't know what effect just got added to the deck, and it has the other things that might be coming out. The second thing is if there are no more cards in the upgrade deck, that would be wild because if you're playing in multiplayer where you have multiple bots in the same game, they are both going to be pulling from the same upgrade deck. And I think that would really be the only time where this would happen, unless your game is just going super duper long. So if there are no more cards left, sorry, it's just a dead draw. And then that goes to that thing earlier in the rules that says sometimes stuff won't happen, and that's okay. That's part of the rules. And then the transfer one at the bottom, which we've already talked about how that works. Up at the top of the right-hand column, we've already talked about multiplayer and co-op as well. So the last thing of the solo mode is just talking about adjusting difficulty. So there are a couple ways that you can make the game more difficult, and then a implied way that you can make it easier. So it says if think you can take on the most cutthroat business competition, give the Automa a starting advantage, or try a more challenging company. So hard mode, the Automa gets to place 3 train cards at the setup instead of 2. Expert mode, it gets to place 4 train cards instead of 2. So again, remember after that first one, which is most central location, and then closest to a city on its preferred terrain type, it will always follow the priorities that it has in the build track action back on page 6. So it doesn't matter if you're adding 1, 2, or 3 additional cards, they're all going to go through that same checklist. So adding like 4 starting train cards would be wild. Now, it doesn't say this in here, but I'm just going to put it out there. The normal mode starts with 2 cards. It stands to reason easy mode would start with 1. Now, I haven't played easy mode, which I just developed just now. So I don't know, that could be, I haven't run the numbers on it. That might be considered like baseline beginner mode, because dropping down that like 1 car would make a humongous difference, I feel. So, use that for what you will. If you want to have a little bit more chill of first time in solo mode, only give them 1 card. But then They have a list, Automa difficulty rating, easiest to hardest. So of the 8 factions, and you'll have all 8 because if you have the solo mode, you got the 2 that were included in as above, so below. You have a spectrum of challenge, and I'm not going to go through exactly why, because for some of them I don't really know exactly the calculus. For some of them I think it's a little bit easier to see. Typically the more like pigeonholed they are into like their terrain type, the easier they're considered. The more like broad they, like Star Chaser Rails has lots of like whatever one you need, and that's going to be beneficial to them because they can, you know, maximize their turns. But that is the solo mode for Empyreal. Now, I took way longer than I probably needed to. You could read through this in way less time than I took to explain it. But hopefully there are a couple of edge cases that I illuminated, a couple of pro tips that I learned the hard way, and just other things to think about. But again, like I said at the beginning, this is a fantastic solo mode, not just because it's easy, but because it's great. It's just it's easy to play. It's fun because of the way these decks work and that they change over time. If you know my root content and the root bots, you know my favorite root bot is the Drillbit Duchy because it changes over the course of the game. The bot you play endgame is different than the one at the beginning game, and that's not just because of the game state. It's because the bot's brain has been reprogrammed, and that's what this does. So I think it's really successful in what it does. It does it easily. It allows you to try the other factions and other strategies and just play this game more, which if you have this game, you're probably looking for ways to play it more because it's huge. And let's say what it is, it cost a little bit of money. But more importantly, the game is super fun. So this allows you to bring in a new player by saying, hey, let's play co-op. I don't know about you, but sometimes other players are more interested in games where they're not pitted against you, the teacher, right off the bat. So this is a great way to onboard them to the game. That's like a half pun. It's a great way for you to just play the game yourself with solo against one or more bots. And it just gives you opportunity to fill out a table, maybe try a player count you haven't played before by bulking up with 1 or 2 bots to a table of, meat bags. But in any case, Empyreal is great. This solo mode is great. And I hope this video is helpful in getting the game to the table because that's the goal, right? So as always, thanks for taking a pause to give pause, and happy gaming. We'll see you next time.